Round 9 coverage of Grand Prix Phoenix. I'm Brian David Marshall. I am joined in the booth by Rich Hagon and here with Jacob Van Loonen, the Pro Tour champion. And we are watching Bryce Gruneich versus Mike Booker. And this is Bring Kiki to Light, a deck we just looked at in the pregame here. And he's playing against Temur Moon. And Jake, this is a deck you're pretty familiar with. I feel like I've said that a lot this weekend. You've played a lot of Modern, but very familiar with on a personal level.
Yeah, so I know Gerard Fabiano pretty well. We do a podcast together weekly, and he recently won a pretty large tournament at the Bearded Dragon Games in Bernardsville, New Jersey, and he was playing basically this exact Temur Moonless. And this is a deck that's been really, really, really good at our local metagame, and I've been really impressed with it. I've done well on Magic Online when I've played leagues with it. I'm excited to see it playing on day 2 here at the Grand Prix.
Now, what is the deck trying to do? Obviously, Blood Moon is something that's referenced in the name.
So the deck only plays 2 Blood Moons. Blood Moon's kind of like a gotcha card that can just steal wins. But the thing that's really impressive about the deck is virtually every card in the deck is just unbelievably powerful. You look through the list, and every card is a card that you'd say, that's a really, really good card in Modern. And when you can put together a deck that's just a pile of the best cards available in the format, that's usually a recipe for success.
Now, how does this deck fare against something like the Bring Kiki to Light deck? Bring Kiki to Light, this deck does not have a lot of basic lands. It only has 3.
Yeah, so if Mike Booker is able to find his Blood Moon in the first game, that's going to give him a really, really big advantage. It might even be able to lock Bryce out of the game to some degree. However, it's important to note here that the fact that Bryce has a way to win completely out of nowhere when he looks like he's a grindy creature deck, that's going to...
And here we see Bryce resolving a Thoughtseize. And he is going to look at a hand. Is that Snapcaster Mage, Remand, Serum Visions, Engineered Explosives, and another Serum Visions? And then a Braid. I think we might not be looking at.
Yeah, this doesn't. It doesn't look like we're watching the Bring Kiki to Light deck.
No.
It seems that.
Okay, so let's see if we can figure out what's going on down there.
Yeah, this does not look
in
right.
the feature match area.
So I think Mike Booker
is playing Temur Moon. I see
Temur
the
Moon,
one Braid.
yeah.
I see the multiple Serum Visions.
Yeah, I think Bryce is actually playing
8-rack.
If he's playing the Overgrown Tomb, I think it may be some.
We'll figure it out. Let's just not assume what he's playing. we'll figure it out as we go along. Let's just follow the action here as Mike Booker resolves another copy of Serum Visions. We have our deck team out figuring out what's going on. Meanwhile, Mike Booker is just sifting through his deck, Jake.
Yeah, just setting up a near perfect draw here.
The triple Serum Visions hand. How do you feel if you open up your hand and you have a couple blue sources and triple Serum Visions? Is that just a snap keep for you if you're playing a deck?
In the dark, it's usually pretty good. A lot of the time, you might be playing against a more aggressive strategy, something like Affinity or a red deck. And in those cases, using your early turns and spending your mana on something that's not affecting the board, that can cause a really serious issue.
Here we see Traverse the Ulvenwald from Bryce. He goes and gets himself a swamp with his Overgrown Tomb. And you see...
And there's Jace the Mind Sculptor. A really powerful card against decks that are trying to rip apart Mike Booker's hand.
Is that Inquisition of Kozilek?
Yeah, so he's not going to be able to take the Jace, but taking Snapcaster Mage is quite nice here. It prevents Mike Booker from getting to use the Serum Visions again in the following turn.
He's going to take the engineered explosives. Makes me think possibly we're looking at an 8-rack deck.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, and I think if he's taking the engineered explosives there, it may lead us to believe that he has a hand that has at least one Tarmogoyf, maybe
he does
more
have
than
he
one.
does have a Tarmogoyf in hand.
Yeah, and what that tells me is that he wants to position himself so that his opponent does not have a way to interact with his creatures, and he just has a clear path to victory by attacking.
All right, well, there is the Tarmogoyf. Got sorcery, land. Let's take a look at what Bryce Gruneich is playing. He's playing Traverse Death Shadow. There you go. So he's got, you know, some main deck Stubborn Denials, which could be pretty nice against a Blood Moon if that's going to happen. But he's got the full package of things, Street Wraiths and Mishra's Baubles. He's also got the Temur Battle Rage combo in this deck, which is always a pretty sweet kill out of nowhere sometimes.
Yeah, the Temur deck generally matches up quite well against these types of discard-based decks that are low to the ground. I think it's a lot of card selection. Engineered Explosives is one of the better answers to a board full of Death Shadows.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Adriano AAS asks, there's no dice for Goyf? No, there is not. We deliberately don't put Tarmogoyf dice onto camera for you. I know it would be useful from a viewer perspective, but is it the phrase derivable information? It's something like that, isn't it? That means that actually you can just look as a player and it's not there as an aid to the players, and so we leave that off the screen.
Yeah, it's not your responsibility to let your opponent know how big your Tarmogoyf is.
Right.
If they ask you, you can simply hand them your graveyard.
So after this match, we'll be heading to Red-White Soul Sisters with Mark Douglas. Talking of sisters, turns out the issue here was brothers. It turns out that Bryce Gruneich has a brother who is playing in this tournament. And the deck list...
Spoilers! I know what he's playing.
Yes, you do. And he was playing Bring Kiki to Light. And the deck lists were filed incorrectly overnight. And so we were given a player that wasn't in the tournament this morning. So there we are. So we are opening with Traverse Shadow against Temur Moon. Apologies for the confusion. We were every bit as confused as you were, I can assure you. And we do nonetheless are underway with Good Morning Magic.
Then you get a look at Mike Booker playing a Jace the Mind Sculptor and using one of the lesser used abilities. Bounces the Tarmogoyf back to Bryce's hand. Ticks it down to 2. But is going to be able to untap and then start going to town.
Yeah, and this is very, very good here for Mike Booker because...
Especially his opponent is obviously constrained on his mana.
Yeah, and Bryce's deck plays no way really to deal with that Jace when he's on this number of lands. The deck needs to have a presence on the board already when the Jace comes down. The fact that Bryce did not means that Mike Booker now gets to untap with a Jace the Mind Sculptor in play. When you're able to do that, it is very difficult to lose the game. It means that Mike Booker now able to play...
Huntmaster of the Fells is the play here following up the Jace, and that's going to give him a nice buffer against that Tarmogoyf to protect his Jace, lets him go and start brainstorming, right?
Yeah, so now he's just going to start brainstorming. He might find a shuffle effect. He can shuffle away cards that aren't very relevant at this point of the game, and he's just going to be brainstorming for the foreseeable future.
There's Huntmaster of the Fells. Perhaps not the artwork you're used to seeing.
Now, Huntmaster of the Fells has been surprisingly strong in Modern. Every time my opponent casts that card against me, it's a nightmare. And every time I cast it, it often feels like it's just winning the game by itself. When that card flips over into Ravager of the Fells, I believe, it deals 2 damage to a creature the opponent controls and to the opponent
Right,
themselves.
it's a little like mini Searing Blaze kind of effect.
Or even sometimes double. right?
Oh, if there's no landfall, yeah.
Yeah.
One thing I really like about this is that it forces your opponent to play a certain way. Your opponent's not going to be leaving up mana to do something at instant speed. They're going to be forced into a situation where they need to do things on their turn. Here, though, Bryce
Bryce has a lot of options. He can Fatal Push the token and force Mike Booker to block. Oh, in fact, he's going to go the opposite direction. He's going to kill the Huntmaster with Dismember. Oh, and then push and then try to get that Jace off the board here.
And this is great for Bryce.
He's got instant now, sorcery, planeswalker, artifact, land. So Fatal Push that. Tarmogoyf is big enough to slay the Jace. Comes at a pretty big expense to Bryce. He has to use 2 cards to kill. But I guess he gets to kill two things. He gets to kill the planeswalker and both ends of the Huntmaster of the Fells.
Yeah, and I mean, Bryce is definitely thrilled with this turn of events. This is really kind of like the turning point in the game is that turn. Mike Booker did not choose to brainstorm on the previous turn, and in doing so, his Jace ended up not breaking even on cards, which is a really hard thing to do with Jace the Mind Sculptor.
Mike has another Jace.
Well, of course.
I have another one, Justin Jace. And now you have to follow the same template here, right? You have to bounce that Tarmogoyf.
Oh, absolutely.
Otherwise, Jace is just, it's not worth the 3 cards, looking at 3 cards.
The thing is, Bryce's hand is just full of removal spells. I think he has multiple Death Shadows, he has a Tarmogoyf, and then he just has removal spells. So if Mike Booker, again, attempts to defend this Jace with creatures, again, his Jace is going to fall to an aggressive line from Bryce. So Mike Booker, he doesn't know it, but if he wants this Jace to live, he needs to start interacting on a different axis here.
And keep in mind, Bryce is playing a Death Shadow deck, so he's pretty happy to be dismembering things.
Yes.
Because he does have, if he has multiple Death Shadows in hand, he can, get another Dismember and then deploy 2 Death Shadows. He will suddenly have, one of the more formidable boards you can see in a game of Modern.
Absolutely.
Now, Mike Booker is just going to continue to bounce the Tarmogoyf and keep Bryce's mana tied up. And, here comes the Blood Moon. And that is going to cut Bryce off from green mana. So he's not going to be able to replay that Tarmogoyf.
Ouch.
Yeah, and that's really nice. Just stranding that card in Bryce's hand. Now his Jace. This is a great way to protect the Jace. Jace on 1 counter. It doesn't matter. Bryce's deck does not play a way to get it off the table that does not involve attacking. Bryce drew a mountain.
Yes.
And another nice thing for Mike Booker here is that with that Blood Moon on the battlefield, Bryce will be unable to use any drawn fetch lands and or shock lands to deal himself damage, which means that his Death Shadows will be stuck at, a relatively low power and toughness unless he's able to draw cards like Street Wraith and or Thoughtseize, and that means that Mike Booker's burn spells are still live.
At what point do you consider, there you go, I was wondering, keeping Bryce off of a basic forest?
Yeah, I think Mike Booker thinks that he's ready to do that right now.
Yeah, he just did. Yeah.
Question in chat, can we time hop to game 2? Occasionally, just occasionally, we show you live magic here on the stream.
Spoilers, there are no basic forests in Bryce's list.
Ooh.
Yeah, these Traverse Shadow lists only play 1 or 2 basics usually.
He has his only non-mountain in play right now.
That's very lucky of him.
Snapcaster Mage comes down and flashes back an Opt.
Mike Booker, I'm sure, is...
Now, is it okay to show that art BDM, given that that's the one that's actually in play?
I mean, kind of.
But only a bit, right?
Yeah.
Okay, let's put the real one up.
Is it mildly disrespectful?
Okay, good.
distasteful.
We'll move back and forth. You can have both. There we go. There we go.
All right, Fatal Push is going to take out the Snapcaster Mage. And so basically, Bryce has a swamp to work with for the rest of this game. And you see the power of Blood Moon in this modern format.
So why is he still playing, Jake? Because what BDM just said there sounds like that has to be it, right?
So, not necessarily.
Right.
I think it's absolutely possible that Bryce is able to stick a Death Shadow, cycle some Street Wraiths, and if Mike Booker decides that he's going to, say, plus his Jace and then use something like a Braid to try to deal with the Death Shadow, and Bryce can protect the Death Shadow by cycling a Street Wraith, then Mike Booker would have made a fatal mistake and given Bryce an opening to maybe be able to get that Jace off the table. It seems incredibly unlikely, and it involves Mike Booker making some pretty serious mistakes, but it's absolutely possible.
Could we see a Jace ultimate here?
I believe we will see a Jace ultimate here,
Awesome.
and I'm really excited about it.
I was going to say, that's not something that you generally let go by, Jake.
There's a Death Shadow.
It doesn't look like Bryce has a way to protect it, so...
Yeah, Lightning Bolt takes the first Death Shadow down. That's going to feel great.
Yeah. And even though that is a 6 on the Jace, I believe it's actually a 9.
It was actually a 9, and Bryce has seen enough. Now, what can Bryce do here after sideboard about that Blood Moon? Because I got to tell you, Mike's going to be bringing in a third one.
Oh, he will absolutely be bringing in a third copy. I think Bryce may try to bring in Engineered Explosives to preemptively set it on 3. Besides that, I mean, his plan against Blood Moon is not that bad. He has a lot of targeted discard.
Right.
And that's an important part of these Traverse Shadow decks is, there are really powerful cards like Blood Moon that are super hard for this deck to beat, but because they're playing so much inexpensive discard, they'll usually be able to get the Blood Moon out of the opponent's hand before the opponent can cast it. What he really needs to worry about is Mike Booker drawing the Blood Moon off the top, which Mike Booker's deck is very good at doing for what it's worth because of cards like Serum Visions.
Right.
So...
And with cards like Jace and Serum Visions, you can also sort of float those cards below the surface if you're worried about having to discard them before you're ready.
Absolutely. And important to note that Jace's Brainstorm effect becomes a lot more powerful when you're playing a lot of fetch lands, which Mike Booker is here, and that's going to allow him to find the Blood Moon much more easily. He's only playing 2 copies, but when you're playing Serum Visions, when you're playing Jace the Mind Sculptor, your deck has a lot of what a lot of people call velocity, which means that you're able to see a very high percentage of your deck over the course of the game.
Man, what genius coined the term velocity for that?
The first person I heard throwing around the term was Jerry Thompson, but I believe the originator might have been somebody else. I think it might have been you. There we go.
So now, what is Bryce going to do? We think he'll bring in an extra Engineered Explosives. What about Mike Booker?
So Mike Booker in this matchup is definitely bringing in an extra copy of Blood Moon. Likely wants to bring in a Roast here. It's a pretty good answer to the Death Shadows and Tarmogoyfs usually. I imagine Courser of Crufix will come in.
Really interesting.
Yeah, this is a grindier matchup when you're expecting the games to go longer, or when you're when you're playing a fair game of Magic. Courser of Crufix is a card that almost always comes in when you're playing a deck like this. Combos really nicely with Jace the Mind Sculptor. You put a land back on the top of your deck, you play it off the top of your deck. You end up drawing
deeper.
An extra card off of your Jace when you activate it. Courser of Crufix is at its worst in a deck like this when you're playing against a combo strategy. Although there are different schools of thought here, Mike Booker may be thinking to himself, I'm sideboarding in an extra Blood Moon. I will likely have much more trouble hitting double green, and because of that, I may not want the Courser in my deck. I think Thragtusk is a card we may end up seeing here post-board from Mike Booker. It's a card that at a converted casting cost of 5 dodges Fatal Push, and even if the opponent has something like a Dismember, it creates a lot of value, and it's a card that makes it really hard to die to something out of nowhere like a Temur Battle Rage.
So let me just talk about Mike Booker for a second here. He's from he lives in Arizona here. He's in Chandler, but he is originally from Baltimore. He's a CPA, and he and his wife.
What's a CPA?
A certified public accountant.
Oh, okay.
And he and his wife have been playing together for 15 years. He wanted to shout out to her that he would not be here without you. I would not be here without you, is what he said. He had a message for his wife.
Oh, fantastic.
They attend local events and GPs together. Mm-hmm. She didn't make day 2, but he hopes she's watching right now. So
well,
that's really nice.
Surely she's busy in the PTQ.
And then Bryce Gruneich, by the way, that's how you pronounce the name.
Okay.
He's from Salt Lake City. He's the dad of a 2-year-old. He trains as a teacher, and he loves playing challenging decks. That's what he enjoys most about the game. So, a deck like Traverse Shadow where you've got to manipulate your life total, manipulate your card draws, in order to get this card that if you just play it, it's going to die. Normally, if you just play it straight up, is the kind of deck that really appeals to him.
Yeah, I mean, the Traverse Shadow deck is definitely one of the most skill-testing decks in the current Modern format.
It also has the advantage of being one of the very powerful decks.
Yeah, I mean, this was one of the winningest decks at the Pro Tour just a few weeks ago. And it's crazy that we're watching Modern now and we're seeing all these new decks and things that are, wild that we haven't seen before, because we just had a Pro Tour like a month ago in Modern, and a lot of people were worried, is this format going to get solved? It did not. The format it got wider.
Well, Jace and Bloodbraid have also been an interesting injection of new life. Not that the old life was bad, but I'm just saying it mixed things up, I think, pretty interestingly.
Yeah, I've been really impressed.
Not as alarming as some people might have feared. The sky didn't fall on those cards yet.
Yeah, I mean, there was a little bit of a Chicken Little moment for many people where they saw Jace the Mind Sculptor get unbanned. They saw Bloodbraid Elf get unbanned, and they said, oh, man, but we have this incredible Modern format. There's so many good decks. Why would they do this to Modern? And it seems like the format just got better, as if that was even possible.
So now we talked about the fact that Mike Booker's playing a deck that a Jace deck that was designed by Gerard Fabiano that Gerard had won an event with, and Mike credits him on the deck list as being the deck designer. Why Huntmaster of the Fells over Bloodbraid for Gerard? Do you know? Do you have any insight into that?
I do not have insight into that. I think the major reason is that the deck plays some amount of counter magic, and the deck also plays more counter magic post board, and counter magic is really kind of a non-bow with Bloodbraid Elf. When you're playing Bloodbraid Elf and you flip into something like a Remand or a Spell Snare, that's not where you want to be. So when you're playing those cards, you don't want Bloodbraid Elf in your deck. There are versions of this Temur deck that do play Bloodbraid Elf, but those do not play the counter magic that Mike Booker has access to. All
right, so meanwhile, we're underway here. Turn 1, Bryce Gruneich has already gotten himself to 14 life with a fetch land, with a shock land, a Street Wraith, and a Thoughtseize, and is looking at a hand, and he's going to take Serum Visions away from Mike Booker on a 1-land hand, despite a lot of other very tantalizing options.
And I like that a lot. I think that he knows that by taking that Serum Visions, if Mike Booker is unable to draw a land on the next turn, instead of being able to draw another card and scry 2, he's going to have to just naturally find those land drops off the top of his deck, and he's giving himself an opportunity to just win the game freely with no opposition.
Which is kind of handy when you're 1-0 down.
Yes.
By the way, we talked about sideboards for Bryce Gruneich. It looks like he also brought in Lingering Souls.
Yeah, there's one in his hand, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. So you see he gets himself down to 12 here.
Yeah, and that's a great card to bring in.
He credits his deck designer as being the internet.
Has had notable success over the years.
Yeah, Lingering Souls generally does well against these types of blue-red X decks.
So here is Death Shadow.
And there was Death Shadow.
Except what is going to happen here.
Mike Booker targeting a 1/1 with the lightning bolt is going to find himself facing off against a much larger creature. The fetch land and the shock land in conjunction will give this Death Shadow +3/+3.
So now
oh
it is.
dear.
Yep. Now it's a 4/4.
4 with 3 damage on it briefly.
Yep.
Gulp.
And Bryce is sitting back on Stubborn Denial now. So he can fight. If Mike had drawn land Blood Moon, he would have been able to fight through it. Bryce is clearly on the front foot here in this match.
Yeah, I mean, he's attacking with a 4/4. He has 1 mana negates in hand.
Jay, do you think
all cylinders firing?
Do you think the lightning bolt was a desperation play from Mike Booker? Because obviously people in chat are saying, hey, look, he's running a 3 damage spell into a 4/4. Is it more likely that he didn't see that the Death Shadow was going to be a 4/4, or that given his state in the game, he needed Bryce to not realize he had the chance to make it a 4/4?
I believe it was just a mistake, plain and simple.
Sure.
And we all make mistakes. I mean, right now he's playing on camera.
And 3 damage to a 1/1 seems a perfectly reasonable thing to do.
And Death Shadow is been joined by another Death Shadow. So this is, I think we're going to see a game 3 here.
Yeah, this one will get closed quite quickly.
There's another Thoughtseize for Bryce.
And that's a lethal Thoughtseize.
What? You see, now this is why Modern's crazy. Because you, Brian David Marshall, have spent this whole game going, he gets himself down to 12, gets himself down to 9, and then you, Jacob Van Loon, go, and there's a lethal Thoughtseize.
Yeah.
And this is Modern. Oh, my word. It's 1-1 here on Good Morning Magic with Rich, BDM, and JVL in the booth. Coming up, we've got a little bit of action from a Red-White Soul Sisters deck. And then we might get a chance to bring you a little bit of 8-rack. That's for round number 1. In round number 2, we're going to have decks that began the day at 7-1. So again, win or lose this round, they'll be live for the top 8 next round. And on the slate, a white-black Smallpox deck, a 4-color Moon Zoo, which seems a bit counterintuitive. Lots of colours and playing Blood Moon. And then Gideon Super Friends, which we saw briefly yesterday on camera. Just the 9 Gideons. I think that's...
the Oops All Gideon strategy?
Yeah, and then there's a Sorin just to sort of mess with it at the top of the pyramid. It's like a sort of base of 4 Ally of Zendikar, and then you've got 3 of the Trials, and then 2 Jura, and then at the top of the pile, you've got this 1 copy of Sorin. So I'm looking forward to seeing the 10 Planeswalker Gideon Super Friends deck. Daniel Brie is playing that. But we're settling in for game number 3 of Traverse Shadow against Team Women. This has actually been a decent match, despite that not being our intent at the start of the round.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things when you play a deck, interesting deck like Temur Moon, is you need to be able to beat a deck. Like Death Shadow, right? This is the kind of deck you're expecting to face.
Yeah.
This is something you need to be able to deal with. So it's always a good test for the interesting decks.
Yeah, Paul Dean I chatted to yesterday. He was playing a Death Shadow deck, and he said, look, I'm not sure it's terribly well positioned at the moment. And I asked, what is the thinking? But a lot of his friends were saying, this isn't the deck to choose this weekend. And he was explaining that the prevalence of Jund decks tend to sort of mitigate against Death Shadow, because Death Shadow itself is quite vulnerable. He said it's quite hard to keep your Death Shadow in play, and maybe we're seeing that. It's kind of okay if you aim a lightning bolt at it and you've got some lands that you can make it into a 4/4.
Fatal Push almost never misses, though.
Yes. Yeah.
Fatal Push is a quite clean way to deal with a Death Shadow.
Neat and tidy.
Yeah, when you're playing against Death Shadows, for what it's worth, and you are playing a deck where Lightning Bolt and Snapcaster Mage are your primary ways to keep your opponent's threats off the table, something I'd like to suggest to viewers is that instead of attempting to get your opponent's Death Shadows off the table, it might be correct to perhaps take a hit from those Death Shadows, then use your Lightning Bolts targeting your opponent, then play your Snapcaster Mage, flashing back your Lightning Bolt, targeting your opponent again, and you can often steal a lot of wins, because your deck, which is a control deck using Lightning Bolt as a removal spell, can turn itself into a burn deck. that can just win the game out of nowhere and punish the opponent for dealing themselves so much damage. And that's a really good strategy.
Yeah, they'll usually get themselves to within 2.5 lightning bolts range of being dead.
Absolutely. And a Snapcaster Mage plus a lightning bolt, that's 8 damage right there, which is often lethal.
Titan's Revenge in chat says, while they shuffle, Hagen will translate card names into French. Now, you see, the silly thing about that is that you shouldn't tempt me, because I've got Gather in front of me, which has a language button, which means, you know, if we want stubborn denial, for example, we could just go,
careful!
Oh, you mean the Déni Obstanier, or the Hartnäckige Ablehnung, which is the German version, or the Negazione Ostinata, which is the Italian version, or the, yeah, now I'm struggling because it's Japanese and Korean next. All right, so here we go. It's game number 3.
Yeah, Mike Booker starting on a full hand. Bryce Gruneich has gone down to 6. And, oh, look, a Serum Visions for Mike Booker.
Yeah. Now he's prepared to set up his draws here.
And we see
Mishra's
Bauble is going to come down for Bryce Gruneich.
Now, Bryce Gruneich, he's doing something pretty interesting here. He's targeting himself with this Mishra's Bauble before he's playing a land. And the reason he's doing that is because he likely
decide whether he's going to fetch or not?
Yeah, he probably has a fetch land and a land that is not a fetch land in his hand, and he wants to decide which one he should play. If he doesn't want that top card of his library, he can play the fetch land and shuffle it away. If he does want that card, he'll play the land that's not a fetch land, and then he'll actually draw that card during his opponent's upkeep. So he doesn't want that top card. He's going to shuffle it away with this Polluted Delta. That's a really tight play. And that's, you know, one of these small advantages that you can get when you're playing these Traverse Shadow decks that play Mishra's Bauble.
Goes and gets a Blood Crypt.
So likely already has access to green mana here. See that
So
breeding pool
possibly setting up for an Engineered Explosives. You know, you talked about that card.
Yeah.
My name is Carlos. I'm going to be your head judge for this event. Before we start, I would like to make a couple of announcements. First of all, please ensure that you
there is a masterpiece, Engineered Explosives. We'll find you a slightly more traditional one in a moment. There we go.
And here is Tarmogoyf. We've got Land, Artifact, and Sorcery. So it's a 3/4.
Yeah, Tarmogoyf gets very big, very fast in a matchup like this. Mike Booker's deck is designed to make Tarmogoyf very large. It plays enchantments, it plays planeswalkers, it plays instants, it plays sorceries. When Mike Booker is playing against a deck that does not have Tarmogoyfs, his Tarmogoyfs are just dominant forces in the game. However, his deck is actually quite weak to opposing Tarmogoyfs because he does not play the black cards that are able to cleanly kill that. He needs to use Engineered Explosives.
Engineered Explosives potentially on both sides of the table here. See, Mike Booker has just drawn one.
Yeah, now Mike Booker, he has 2 islands in play. And now searching up a forest here. I believe he does have double Blood Moon in hand, but not going to be able to deploy that this turn.
Could have gotten a Stomping Grounds there, but maybe wanted to preserve his ability to get to 3.
Yeah, and he probably just wants access to green mana after he casts the Blood Moon also. Doesn't want to cut himself off here.
All right, so there you see Engineered Explosives on 2. Means he's going to be able to take care of that Tarmogoyf.
And I think that may have been a little bit conservative on Mike Booker's part. When my opponent has 2 non-basics and they're playing some type of shadow deck, their deck plays so few basics that I feel like when I have an opportunity to play a Blood Moon and I have another access to at least 2 of my colors, I pretty much just want to play it right away, especially given that I have an Engineered Explosives to clean up that Tarmogoyf.
All right, Inquisition of Kozilek, what do you got? Oh, I've got a Bolt. I've got these 2, you know, Blood Moons. I've also got a Jace the Mind Sculptor.
That's a pretty good hand.
Still going to be a pretty good hand after this after this Inquisition resolves.
We don't want to hand out any penalties for tardiness.
In the Inquisition, if Bryce does not have a redundant copy of Inquisition, then he may have to take something like Lightning Bolt, which is not really something you want to take in this spot.
We do have a clock for this event. It is right next
and with that Engineered Explosives on 2 here, it means that Bryce does not want to play the extra Tarmogoyf he has in hand. Mike Booker with a lot of decisions here. He
has to think about Stubborn Denial here.
Yeah, he has to think about Stubborn Denial. In addition to having to think about Stubborn Denial, the choice between Jace the Mind Sculptor and Blood Moon is pretty significant here. If he plays Jace the Mind Sculptor, he's able to bounce that Tarmogoyf, leave himself with that Explosives on 2, still on the battlefield to deal with the Tarmogoyfs in the future. But he may just want to play Blood Moon and kind of lock his opponent out of the game.
Well, he puts Blood Moon down, and we see Bryce is going to go fetch up his Swamp. He didn't have any other basics in his sideboard, right?
He does not, so he's going to find a basic Swamp.
And that will be his operating mana for the rest of the game in terms of his colored spells.
Right, because we said, confirmed earlier that there were no basic forests, right?
He has 1 Swamp as his only basic land.
And pretty cool now, Mike Booker's Jace the Mind Sculptor in hand right now suddenly has a -1 ability that destroys a Tarmogoyf.
Yes.
And that's a pretty impressive -1 for a 4-mana Planeswalker.
Doing mulligans, keeping opening hands, but please do not start playing yet. Once again, you can start shuffling, mulliganing, and keeping opening hands, but do not start playing yet.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So Bryce chooses to dismember his own Tarmogoyf, figuring maybe he's not going to get another opportunity to cast that spell.
Yeah, I suppose he
get himself low enough that he can try to stick a Death Shadow.
It's trying to.
But he knows that Jace is coming, and here it is, Jace the Mind Sculptor. And it goes right up to 5. He's like, no, I don't know what you might have, but I don't want you to get it. I'm just gonna keep attacking the top of your deck. So here, this is a card you can have. You can have a Mishra's Bauble. That's fine.
I like how aggressively Mike Booker immediately goes to the Fate Seal mode. Yeah.
Because I mean, Brainstorm's not naturally considered particularly powerful or anything.
I mean, this is kind of showcasing the power of Jace the Mind Sculptor, too. And, I mean, Jace the Mind Sculptor can be used in such a wide variety of ways. The Brainstorm mode is so powerful. And, when you're playing a card like Blood Moon and you have an Engineered Explosives on the battlefield already, then the Fate Seal mode is incredible. I mean, it becomes a win condition. And here we're watching, Mike Booker, his plan immediately upon resolving that Jace the Mind Sculptor is, I'm going to win with this Jace the Mind Sculptor. This is my win condition now. I've just turned myself into a control deck. Good luck.
Yeah, I mean, a fistful of cards for Bryce. And I feel like Blood Moon is just a card you have to be thinking about all the time in this modern format.
Yeah, and again,
you feel like it's a card that keeps the format somewhat fair.
Yeah, I think it's important. I think it's a restriction on the way you build your deck. I also think that Bryce's deck, I think these Shadow decks, the way they deal with Blood Moon is by making their opponent discard the Blood Moon. And it's very rare that you play against a deck like Mike Booker's, who is playing Blood Moon in addition to a bunch of library manipulation. Usually the Blood Moon decks are something like Ponzo, where they have to just naturally draw it or have it in their hand.
Gerard Fabiano strikes again, man.
Yeah. Gerard's wacky concoctions are...
Mike Booker gets
quite
Jace
powerful.
Up to 9, which means, by the way, when he gets to actually use the ability, he'll also still have Jace in play because it's going to go up. It goes up in 2, so it'll be 13 when he ultimates it. So there is another engineered explosives. This one's set to 1. And Jace is at 11. I hope you like your hand, Bryce, because that is going to be your library.
Yes. And, Mike Booker, all he has to do is
Really,
put
really
Death Shadows on the bottom, and this game is over.
new meaning to the word Doomsday.
That in Masters 25, I do believe.
All right, so a Death Shadow gets eaten
And now
by
Mike,
an engineered explosives.
even protecting now with a cryptic command, in addition to all the fate sealing that has been happening. And that's right, he's going to cast this cryptic command despite having a Blood Moon on the battlefield and playing a 3-color deck. That's not a problem for him. The thing is, when you play this Temur Moon deck, this happens all the time. This is not like a strange turn of events. I have not seen the Fate Seal line be so aggressive in the past. I usually just end up attacking my opponent and brainstorming my way to victory, but I may be switching my game plan because this seems great.
There's a 13 on Jace. Draw for the turn.
Here we go.
Yep. Bring Jace down to 1. Exile your library.
Yeah,
Bryce is like, how bad is this for me?
it's pretty bad for you, Bryce.
Oh, good.
By the way, I'm also going to mind twist you
Yes.
and exile your library. And yeah, Bryce is going to extend the hand. It's empty. He's got nothing else to do with it. So he says, "Good job there, Mike Booker." And Mike's like, "Yo, I just ultimated Jace on camera."
So Mike Booker, the CPA, opens his account here in round 9. So we're going to bring things back to the booth. That's the end of round number 9 in terms of live action. Rich BDM JVL here with you, but we've got plenty more round 9 action coming up. We're going to show you a little bit of Red White Soul Sisters, and then if we get a chance before the next round, a little bit of 8-rack. That's coming your way on Good Morning Magic. We'll be back after these messages.
Our City Guide for the first double event of the year, Grand Prix Seattle, Standard and Legacy. For this one, we got some sweet shots of things that you get to do around the city while you're there. Let's check them out. Welcome to Seattle, the home of Magic the Gathering and the home of our first double GP this year in April. We're here to give you a look at some of the cool things you can do in town, starting with the Space Naval. Built in 1962 for the World's Fair, it is 600 feet tall and is built to withstand earthquakes, massive winds, and has 25 lightning rods. Because with a building this big, you really want to be sure. Before the elevators were installed, workers commuted to work in a metal bucket. That's absolutely ridiculous. The views are amazing. You can see all of downtown, you can see Mount Rainier and like Elliott Bay and everything, and it actually is, even on what's like kind of a little bit of a foggy day, you can still see everything. It's actually awesome. Major part of the Space Needle is that the entire thing is filled with the intoxicating smell of caramel popcorn, which like I had to get a bag. I didn't remember doing it. I was just drawn in by it and I had to get it. Oh, it's so good. It's actually really good. Yeah. Come to the world's first ever Starbucks and try their special Pike Place roast. This is Pike Place Market, the #1 tourist attraction in Seattle. It's over 100 years old and is easily the best place in the state to see a fish get hurled 3 feet in the air. This is just a stone's throw from the Space Needle and is the Globe Fountain. It's this awesome water show fountain that plays music 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and it's really cool because it's all lit up at night. This is the Artist Playground at the Seattle Center, which is kind of just a playground by day, but it's also a bunch of musical instruments. The swings have wind chimes attached to them. There's an entire pipe piano kind of thing you can play over there. It's actually really cool, and at night the whole thing's super quiet. The playground is also the only thing on our entire trip that has the coveted Jane's seal of approval. You having a good time? And this is GameWorks, a retro-style arcade right next to the convention center where you can play a bunch of old-style arcade games and win carnival tickets. So if you're coming into town to walk away with a giant plushy snake, this is the place to do it.
When you're in Seattle, one of my favorite restaurants to go to is called Wild Ginger. It's not that far from the venue. Get the 7-flavor beef. You're welcome.
This is the Washington State Convention Center, which you'll be pleased to know is right in the middle of the city, which means there's tons of food, hotels, and things to do around here. And it's easy to find because of this giant archway. If you're flying into Seattle-Tacoma, or SeaTac as the locals call it, the best way to get to downtown Seattle is with the Light Link rail straight from the airport. Be it for Standard or for Legacy, we can't wait to see you at GP Seattle.
Hello everyone, welcome back. Rich BDM and JVL looking through deck lists here during round number 9. We're going to check in on Mark Douglas. He's playing Red-White Soul Sisters. At 6-2, he can still win the tournament, but as we join the match, he's already 1 game down. So let's see how the Norin Soul Sisters does against Tyler Whitman with Infect. Here's BDM and JVL with the call.
All right, well, we're going to get things kicked off here with a Soul's Attendant from Mark Douglas, one of the key pieces in the Soul Sisters combo.
You know, every time a creature enters the battlefield, Mark Douglas is going to be gaining a little bit of life. This deck has some pretty powerful stuff that it can do. With Norin the Wary, every time anything happens, Norin's a worry guy. You know, he's a worrier. So Norin's going to be leaving the battlefield, re-entering the battlefield. In doing so, he's going to be creating tokens via Genesis Chamber. He's going to be gaining life via cards like Soul Warden and Soul's Attendant. Just pretty impressive stuff.
We've got a reader here from Tyler Whitman. That is a Genesis Chamber.
And we'll see if we can pull Genesis Chamber up on the screen for you.
We can't.
Oh, we can't? Oh, okay, yeah. Sorry. So, yeah, Genesis Chamber, though, going to be creating mirror tokens, or mirror tokens for Mark Douglas here.
Yeah, whenever a non-token creature comes into play, if Genesis Chamber is untapped, that creature's controller puts a 1/1 mirror artifact creature token into play. So it's a symmetrical effect.
Mm-hmm.
So you can theoretically tap it on your turn. Now the thing about Mark Douglas's deck is that it's designed to gain ridiculous amounts of life. He is facing off against one of the decks in the room that does not give one iota of concern to how much life Mark Douglas gains. He just doesn't care. He's playing Infect. He is just trying to get 10 points of damage with an Infect creature across the table to Mark Douglas.
Yeah, and that's going to take a lot of wind out of Mark Douglas's sails, because Mark Douglas here, you know, part of his defensive strategy is that he can just take tons of damage because of how much life he's gaining. And with Tyler Whitman on Infect, especially with a card like Blighted Agent that can attack freely and not be blocked, it means that Mark Douglas is just really up against it in a matchup like this. He doesn't even have any way to get that Blighted Agent off the table effectively in the first game here.
And he's already down a game as we pick this up, so...
Oh, yeah, so, I mean, post-board, I guess he would have access to something like Engineered Explosives, but I guess, yeah, that it does not look good for Mark Douglas.
He does have 4 Path to Exile after sideboarding.
Yeah.
So here we see Norin the Wary. Norin's going to come into play. Mark is going to get a mirror. He's going to gain 2 life because of the Soul's Attendant. Now he's going to, oh, look, he's going to play another Genesis Chamber. That's going to trigger Norin the Wary, which is going to phase out.
He's like, whoa, 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 what is this?
Genesis Chamber.
I
I don't know how I feel about this.
Let's take a step back, everybody.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay, all right, it's not so bad. All right, here, come back.
Norin comes
All
back.
right, cool.
Now, that's going to trigger both Genesis Chambers, and that means Mark is going to gain 3 more life.
Yeah.
Again, not necessarily relevant against Tyler's deck.
Mark Douglas's deck can close surprisingly quickly also, though, for what it's worth. Perforos, God of the Forge, when you're using Norin the Wary to its fullest advantage, when you're using Genesis Chambers, that card ends the game very quickly. Remember, whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control when you have Perforos, God of the Forge, you're able to deal 2 damage to your opponent. Ooh, so here it looks like there is I believe a Blighted Agent with double strike right now? About to get into the red zone? Yeah, it's an Assault Strobe here for Tyler Whitman. Assault Strobe, it may be a sorcery, but for 1 red mana, you're able to give a creature you control double strike. And
so that's going to be 4 Infect here because you're going to get an Exalted trigger off of the Noble Hierarch.
And Tyler Whitman, if he had pretty much any pump spell in his deck there, that could have just ended the game. Mark Douglas tapped out.
A lot of people, Jake, talking in chat about, obviously this is a terrible matchup for Soul Sisters. Is that a function of playing a deck that is on, if you like, for one of a better term, on an extreme end of the format? Like, does this still happen to Jund, to Death Shadow, to Burn, to Affinity, to Blue-White Control? Are there this bad of a matchup sitting there for those decks, or is this because you're playing an extreme deck that you end up with matchups that are, oh, okay, this is bad?
I think there's a little bit of both. For example, if you're playing a deck like Jund or Abzan, these really middle-of-the-road decks that kind of have the reputation of not having any really, really bad matchup, those decks are still very, very weak to the Eldrazi and or Tron decks in the format. It might not be quite as bad as what we're seeing here, but you're still going to have your good and bad matchups, and I think Soul Sisters is surprisingly good in the current Modern format.
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't be so quick to say as, oh, he's being punished for playing a non-tier 1 deck. I don't think tiers necessarily exist in Modern right now. I've seen some really wacky decks win tournaments very recently, and you can play whatever you want in this format.
So here we see
Don't get scared.
Mages to the Moon. It's going to set, all sorts of triggers in play. You see Mark Douglas, approaching double his starting life total soon.
And it not mattering. Boo.
But you know what? He is also putting together an army of mirror tokens, and Tyler's at 16 here.
Yeah, Mark may be able to steal this one. The thing about Tyler is that we know he does not have green pump spells in hand, because last turn when his opponent was tapped out and he was attacking with his unblockable double-striking Blighted Agent, he did not use a pump spell to win the game. So
could have been probing for a Path to Exile, though, also.
Well, I believe Mark was tapped out.
He's tapped out last turn also. Okay.
So in that situation, it means that this Blood Moon could turn off the cards that matter in Tyler's hand. And Mark Douglas is putting together quite the offensive force of his own here, just with these tokens. Norin is...
This also means his Inkmoth Nexus won't be able to... Oh, there's another Assault Strobe. To attack for another 4 points minimum. Oh.
Yeah.
There's the mutagenic growth.
And that's it.
That is going to be ball game here.
Yeah, that puts Mark Douglas... Oh, and
with
a blossoming
defense. He's like, I really want to kill you.
Yeah. 16 Infect. Yeah, that'll do.
All right, Tyler Whitman.
Alrighty, there we go. Tyler Whitman wins and advances to 7-2. He's still in contention for top 8. That's probably it for Red White Soul Sisters. And that is it for round number 9. I can tell you that the last result has come in. It was a draw. So we do still have some draws here in Modern. But when we come back, we'll be heading for round number 10, in which the three of us will guide you through, as long as we get them into the feature match area successfully.
Yes.
White-Black Smallpox, played by Jose Daniel Garcia Rosas. Four-Color Moon Zoo by Jason Flanzer. And maybe we'll get to see a bit more of all this stacks of Gideon Planeswalkers in the pyramid leading up to the copy of Sorin. That's White-Black Gideon Super Friends in the hands of Daniel Gruneich. So that's about it for round number 9. In just a couple of minutes, we'll have round number 10, because that's how sequential life works. See you in a minute.